On this Tuesday night, Inflation Nation, the struggle for some Canadians to keep up with rising food and housing costs.
People who are making good salaries who aren't able to afford the rent.
Where interest rates could be headed. New threat, what the Russian president says might push him to fire nuclear weapons, and why critics are not worried. Carrot recall, the expanding warning about products linked to a deadly E. coli outbreak. And the accidental discovery of a priceless Canadian painting.
It stood out from other things.
He bought it for $50, how it could be auctioned off for tens of thousands more.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. With the cost of living top of mind for so many Canadians, there is some unsettling news about inflation. It went up in October after 4 straight months of decline. Stats Canada says the annual inflation rate hit 2% last month. That is higher than expected, though still within the Bank of Canada's target. More on what that might mean for interest rates in just a moment. But first, Heidi Petracek on what inflation means for Canadians trying to make ends meet.
Not overly, right?
That 97-cent pineapple is a sweet deal for Tammy Baker-Lazaro, as the retiree shops not just for herself and her husband, but her senior parents too.
And, you know, when you live on pensions, that's all you have. So we depend on it now.
Tammy finds savings here.
$5.97, that's a pretty big bag, 3 pounds.
On what's considered a slow day at this independent grocer in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
This is quiet, and it's been these have been our quiet times since inflation kind of went crazy, and now it's just the usual that we're always on our toes, lots of trucks, lots of customers.
Hearing inflation went up in October doesn't surprise anyone here, but it does upset them.
Before we go out the door each month, we need to make at least $9,000 to keep the wolf away from the door.
Out of all the items that make up the basket of household expenses used to calculate inflation, the rising price of food is still hitting Canadians hard, outpacing overall inflation at 3% compared to last October. And how much it costs to keep a roof overhead has gone up too, almost 5% year over year. That includes property taxes, increasing the most in a year since 1992. Rents slowing down, but still high, keeping this legal aid worker busy fighting evictions.
Now we're seeing what we would consider just average working people, right? Or people who are making good salaries who aren't able to afford the rent and are afraid of being evicted.
But I think the key message that I want to, tell everybody is that we just need to remain calm. We're at target. There are a lot of indications that the risks are balanced both on the positive and on the negative.
$100 with all of it.
The numbers Tammy cares most about?
On one order, we saved $87.
Any dollars she can save. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
Anne Gaviola is our senior business correspondent. Anne, what should we make of this rise in inflation in October? Could it be the start of an upward trend?
Donna, it is the first pickup in inflation we've seen since May, so I understand why some people may be very concerned when they see the headlines. But this is to be expected. In fact, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem said he expects inflation to bounce around. Think of it as a roller coaster with dips and heights, as opposed to falling straight down like a rock. The most important thing to pay attention to is the trend, and inflation has been cooling for months and is trending in the right direction.
And everyone is watching interest rates. What impact could this have on the next Bank of Canada announcement?
So this doesn't move the needle a ton because economists were, very broadly speaking, expecting an uptick in inflation. What this does is it shrinks expectations for an outsized move by the Bank of Canada at its final interest rate announcement of the year on December 11th. But the economists I've spoken with think a 1/4 point or a 1/2 point cut remains on the table. And the next big piece of data that the central bank has to digest between now and December is at the end of this month. So we're going to get a read of GDP and see how the Canadian economy is faring. We'll get a sense of how much support in the form of a rate cut it actually needs. Donna?
All right, Anne Gaviola in Toronto, thank you. Russia's president has signed a decree which lowers the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. It is not a surprise. Vladimir Putin signaled in September that he intended to do this. Now that Ukraine has the green light to fire long-range American-made ballistic missiles on Russian targets, Putin is ratcheting up his rhetoric. Jackson Proskow looks at what it means.
1,000 candles flickered in the darkness, marking 1,000 days of war, just as Moscow signals an ominous new threat. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said nuclear weapons can be used in response to a conventional attack from any nation supported by a nuclear power, just as Ukraine is supported by the U.S. It follows the U.S. decision to let Ukraine strike targets inside Russia with American long-range missiles, which Ukraine has now taken advantage of. The Kremlin claims it's a new phase of the Western war against Russia, saying it represents the direct involvement of the U.S. and its allies.
Despite what Russia says, neither the United States nor NATO pose any threat to Russia.
Nuclear saber-rattling has been part of Russia's playbook since day one of its full-scale invasion.
And any call for nuclear warfare is an irresponsibility.
The threats have never materialized. Former diplomats see little reason why they would now.
We should not be deterred from supporting the Ukrainians just because they're changing something on a piece of paper.
Yet Russian desperation is increasingly evident on the front lines. Renewed nuclear threats may be a short-term deterrent, with Moscow banking on the election of Donald Trump, potentially opening the door to a negotiated truce in the new year.
The challenge for anyone negotiating right now is going to be trying to create a lasting peace that actually keeps Ukraine safe, as opposed to just giving Putin's army a chance to catch its breath.
The U.S. says it's neither surprised nor concerned by the change in Russia's nuclear threshold, and it is not adjusting its own nuclear posture as a result, noting that Russia has signaled its plans for several weeks. Donna?
All right, Jackson in Washington, thanks. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he supports Ukraine's use of long-range missiles on Russian military targets and is disappointed leaders at the G20 in Brazil did not take a stronger stand against Russian aggression. David Aiken is traveling with the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was one of several G20 leaders who pressed the group to take action on Ukraine.
We are all extremely concerned about the impact of the destabilization of the rules-based order that Russia has engaged in.
And he acknowledged there was some urgency to get weapons, money, and support to Ukraine before the return of Donald Trump.
We're very aware of potential challenges with President Trump coming in, but we're not going to panic. We're going to continue to stay focused on getting the support to Ukraine that Ukraine needs to win this war.
Including to let Ukraine use American long-range missiles to strike targets inside Russia. It's a move Canada had long supported.
I think it's a good thing that the United States has done that and other partners are doing that.
Trudeau also said he was frustrated the G20 failed to use strong language to condemn Russian aggression.
No, it's not strong enough for me.
Trudeau will now prepare to host the G7 summit next June in Alberta, and he acknowledged that the return of Trump could make that difficult.
The challenge of working with an American president that doesn't always put multilateralism and symmetry at a high priority is going to be real.
And that has been one of the overarching themes here. Many leaders, Justin Trudeau among them, are concerned that the decisions they have collectively made to fight climate change, to deal with global hunger, to manage global security issues will not survive contact with the next Trump administration. Donna.
David Aiken in Rio de Janeiro, thanks. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump watched a test launch in Texas today of Elon Musk's reusable Starship rocket system. Musk was a big backer of Trump's campaign and has been appointed to rid the government of wasteful spending and regulations. Also today, Trump announced former television talk show host Dr. Mehmet Oz is his pick to lead the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Dr. Oz was also a big supporter of Trump. In 2022, he ran unsuccessfully for Senate in Pennsylvania. He is a real doctor, but his critics say he provided a platform for potentially dangerous medical advice when he hosted his TV show. Today, Trump said there may be no physician more qualified and capable than Dr. Oz to make America healthy again. In Ottawa, calls from the opposition for Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault to step down got heated during question period today.
That fraudulent minister must resign, or the Prime Minister must fire him.
The Speaker asked Michelle Rempel-Garner to withdraw the word fraudulent, and when she refused, she was kicked out of the House of Commons, as were two other Conservative MPs. Boissonnault has not been charged with anything, though Edmonton police are investigating a complaint about fraud at his former company, and his former business partner is also facing several lawsuits related to allegations of fraud. Boissonnault has said repeatedly he has nothing to do with the business since he was re-elected as MP for Edmonton Centre, but text messages from his former business partner have surfaced which mentioned someone named Randy multiple times after Boissonnault's re-election. He's also been accused of claiming Indigenous ancestry and later apologized for not making it clear his adoptive family has Métis ancestry. Today, Prime Minister Trudeau said he supports Boissonnault.
I'm happy that he is continuing to lead on issues around jobs and employment and represent Alberta in our government.
Also today, NDP MP Blake Desjardins, who is Métis, joined calls for Boissonnault to step down over what he calls harmful false claims to Indigenous ancestry.
We had a sitting cabinet minister in the chair of power in our country that's committed to reconciliation but can't even see how damaging and incredibly racist. He should resign.
Indigenous Services Minister Patty Heidi has revealed Ottawa removed 1,100 organizations from a list of Indigenous-owned businesses in 2022 because they were not eligible for a multi-billion-dollar Indigenous procurement program. Earlier this year, a Global News investigation in collaboration with researchers at First Nations University found non-Indigenous companies gained access to billions of dollars in contracts meant for First Nations, Métis and Inuit businesses. Haiju says her department will hand over responsibility for the business directory to Indigenous leaders.
The goal is that we would be able to have something in place by 2025, and I would say that sooner if possible.
The government is working with Indigenous groups to make sure the procurement program works as intended, boosting First Nations, Inuit and Métis economies by giving them access to goods and services contracts. One Canadian woman caught up in the so-called Islamic State. Coming up, why a family member says she felt she had no other choice. Years after emerging as a toxic mix of extremism and terror, the so-called Islamic State, or ISIS, has left a trail of anguish and despair, not only across the Middle East, but here in Canada. The Canadian government estimates 180 Canadians traveled to join ISIS during the height of its power. In part two of our Global News investigation, Jeff Semple has the story of an Edmonton couple who were part of it.
She was such a beautiful girl.
Lacey McMillan showed us photos of her sister-in-law, Amy Vasconez, from happier times, before she allegedly joined the so-called Islamic State.
It all happened so fast.
She says Amy, a graphic designer who loved to dance, met her husband Ali Abdel-Jabbar 16 years ago at a bar in Edmonton. He was a Muslim who started his own landscaping business. Amy, a Catholic, converted to Islam. They got married and had 2 sons.
He had a good family and had the same values Amy had.
But soon after the couple moved into this townhouse complex, McMillan says their behavior began to change. They became close with their neighbors, fellow Muslim convert Helena Carson and Yazan Kaludi.
In Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, pretty much where I grew up.
Ali founded a production company which included videos of sermons and interviews with controversial Islamic figures. Amy later told the FBI that Ali became stricter with her, and around 2014, he told her he wanted to leave Canada to live in a Muslim country. The RCMP says that in 2015, the 2 couples traveled with their young children to war-torn Syria to join ISIS.
But she told her mom the black flag had risen.
Before traveling overseas to join the fight, the ISIS recruits apparently practiced their firearms skills at this gun range near Edmonton. Witnesses told police they were armed with military-like rifles. They say the men appeared inexperienced, running up and down the range, firing from the hip. After arriving in Syria, Ali was assigned to an ISIS brigade for foreign fighters. Months later, he was killed. Suffering losses, ISIS began preparing women to fight. The RCMP says it is believed that Amy joined an ISIS battalion and has likely been trained in military tactics, weapons, and techniques by ISIS members. She remarried another ISIS fighter and became pregnant. As ISIS fell, she fled and was interviewed by CNN. She said Ali gave her no choice.
As your husband, he's like, I'm telling you to come here. And as a Muslim wife, you have to obey.
I want them to be happy.
Amy and her 3 sons are now back in Edmonton. McMillan says the eldest, who's 12, suffered hearing loss from the explosions.
I can't imagine what they've seen over there. It breaks my heart.
Amy was not criminally charged and released on a conditional peace bond.
She's not the same Amy that we knew. Like, she says that she wanted to do this stuff, but I feel like they forced her to, or they brainwashed her. I want my sister back.
Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Tomorrow, Jeff has the story of a Yazidi family who escaped genocide in Iraq and came to Canada, but whose daughter remained as an ISIS slave. Measles outbreak ahead, one province dealing with climbing cases of the preventable disease. A measles outbreak in New Brunswick is expected to get worse. 44 cases are now confirmed, most of them in children who were not vaccinated. The airborne virus is highly contagious. It causes fever, cough, runny nose, sore or red eyes, and a rash. People born after 1970 who have not had 2 doses of the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine should get vaccinated. In Canada last year, there were only 12 measles cases. The New Brunswick outbreak is the largest in that province in 30 years and appears to have begun with a travel-associated case reported October 24th. A number of carrot products are being recalled across Canada because of an E. coli outbreak. The affected brands are Compliments Organic, PC Organics, Cal Organic, and Bunny Love. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says the tainted carrots were sold or have best before dates ranging between August 14th and November 2nd. The recall was triggered by a recall in the United States where contaminated carrots have been linked to 1 death and at least 39 E. coli infections. No illnesses have been reported here in Canada. The Canadian Mental Health Association says Canadians aren't getting the necessary support when it comes to their mental health. A new report from the association found 2.5 million Canadians cannot find the help they need. The report also found mental health in this country is 3 times worse today than it was before the COVID-19 pandemic. Mental health isn't part of Canada's universal health care system, and people often have to pay out of pocket for counselling. On average, provinces and territories spend just over 6% of health care budgets on mental health. The man who wrote the book on traveling for less, Arthur Frommer, has died. Frommer's guidebook, Europe on $5 a Day, revolutionized budget travel back in 1957. He made lots of people realize they could see the world without spending a fortune. To Frommer, travel was more than sightseeing in foreign places. It was visiting them on their own terms. He died of complications from pneumonia at the age of 95. Next, the Canadian treasure bought in a barn for a bargain. A rare silver coin set a world record today, selling at auction for more than $2.5 million US. The 3-pence coin was made before the American Revolution, struck in Boston in 1652. That's just weeks after the first mint had opened in the then British colony. On one side, a stamp signifies the coin was made in New England, and on the other side, its value is written in Roman numerals. An Emily Carr painting bought for just $50 at a barn sale in the U.S. is about to be auctioned off in Toronto. The acclaimed Canadian artist painted it on a 1912 trip to Haida Gwaii in B.C. But after that, it apparently went unrecognized until earlier this year. And now, as Eric Sorensen explains, its true value is coming to light.
Yeah, a great car puts a smile on your face.
David Heffel's white gloves come out now for a painting that was stored in a barn in New York for almost a century.
So this is a special car, the Grizzly Bear pole, but also Emily Carr.
M for Millie, Emily Carr's nickname, plus the location and date. Masset, QCI, Queen Charlotte Islands, 1912, what is now Haida Gwaii, British Columbia. The grizzly, an essential part of the Haida mythology that makes this Emily Carr historically exceptional.
Carr really was our first Canadian modernist. This one in particular with the First Nations subject matter is very special. The aesthetics and the power behind this great grizzly bear pole that was an old masset.
Research by Heffel's auction found Carr traveled up the BC coast where she found that very pole topped with a grizzly, carved by the famed Edenshaw family. But how did the painting end up across the continent on Long Island, New York?
We are lucky with Emily Carr that we have access to her journals.
They discovered that she visited a friend at a Long Island farmhouse. Seems the painting was put away and only showed up decades later at a barn sale.
I knew it had a look and that it was something special.
Alan Tribitz has a gallery on Long Island and bought a few pieces at the barn sale, including the one labeled Emily Carr for $50 US. He didn't know who she was and then went online.
Then it's okay, it's special, it's pretty important. And then it's like, oh, wow.
He learned that Emily Carr is one of Canada's most renowned artists, honored with a statue in Victoria, several schools that bear her name, and a special place in major galleries across the country, where royalty and average Canadians have long admired her work.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime.
Tribitz shipped his discovery to Heffel Auctions in Toronto, which has sold many Emily Carr paintings. On Wednesday night, dozens of significant works will be put on the block, but there's bound to be some buzz when the bidding starts on this long-lost piece of true Canadiana.
When we're up on the podium, I'm sure we'll hear a little extra rustling on the chairs in front of us.
Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the victory party for the Toronto Argonauts. Maple Leaf Square was packed with Argos fans to celebrate winning the Grey Cup. It is the 19th time the team has won Canadian football's biggest prize, the most of any franchise. Thanks for watching and hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.